Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. On today's episode, I have with me Jon Charbonneau, the co-founder and general partner at DBA Fund. Okay. No, but see, Jon, I've known you before this. We've known each other for years, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it still sounds funny for me to hear that, but yes. Yeah, glad to be on.
No, but yes, we were, when was the first time we met? We met, I feel like, when you were at Delphi.
Yeah, we met like right after I joined crypto because you were at that like the diner dinner that like Robert had put together, right?
Yes.
I think it was the first time I met you in person, right?
I think so. Robert at Flashbots, who I hope our listeners at the Infinite Jungle Show know about because he's been on the show too. I'd like to talk with you, Jon, about Ethereum's competitive value against other coins like Bitcoin and Solana and Celestia. And you have been quite vocal on Twitter to say that you are, number one, not a maxi, and number two, that you see a lot of value in Solana and Celestia outperforming and outcompeting Ethereum in the near term.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I too, truly, I'm not a maxi either. I know it seems like it, but I try not to be. And so hopefully, we'll have a very kind of solid discussion that it doesn't lean one way or the other. Or maybe, we do, but for good reason.
I usually set some people off.
Okay. Before we get started with our discussion, for our show listeners, here is a quick show disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. One of the posts, Jon, that I am going to link into our show notes for this episode for everybody that's listening to the show to take a look at is your North Star piece. I, too, have kind of bemoaned the fact that Ethereum doesn't have a North Star, but I've really come around to the fact that Ethereum doesn't have one particular objective or goal of like what Ethereum's trying to be. Your post, however, really pushes that Ethereum should have a North Star and points to North Stars that the other ecosystems have. Solana being the decentralized NASDAQ. Celestia, I think you said unstoppable apps. Are these really North Stars for these ecosystems? Because to me, when I hear that, it just sounds like a marketing term, like a marketing spiel. It doesn't mean anything. So does Ethereum, what do you really say? Does Ethereum really need a catchy two-liner, two-word, three-word phrase like that?
Yeah, it's the nobody knows what it means, but it gets the people going meme. There's definitely a degree of that. In some sense, I think that those kind of two-word phrases are really more reflection of the internal clarity that like actually exists in them. Because at the end of the day, like decentralized NASDAQ or whatever, like that is a marketing term and it is obviously not very literal. If it was like very literal, that like would be kind of uninspiring and just like, I mean, like obviously Solana is like very strictly a superset of that. I think that both of those and like kind of the world computer thing do very much point to, though, what I think are reasonable, clear goals for each of them, and I think they do encapsulate it well. Of going through them, like decentralized NASDAQ for Solana, like yes, it's not like totally literal, but I think it points to very clearly like there is a very strong focus on particularly trading and finance as a basic application. Like that is what they are optimizing for, and the decentralized part of that is important too. So the comparison would be like, all right, something like Hyperliquid, you would call that like centralized NASDAQ, basically. Like there's not the same degree of decentralization. And in particular for something like Solana, where, MCP, multiple concurrent proposers, is like actually very plausibly going to be important to their long-term design and like kind of like edge in what their system, the decentralization part is like actually a key part of what they're building. And, we're very optimized for trading. So like, it's not a perfect literal term in the same way that you can't have like a two-worder for like Apple, but like it actually gets pretty directly to what the point is. I would say the same thing with Celestia Unstoppable Apps, like not, entirely perfect, fully encapsulating. But, if you compare that to something like Ethereum, I would say the unstoppable part, a lot of it is there. I think that Celestia, a lot of their focus would be, there's like an extra part to that matters a lot, which is verifiability, which I would say that they have prioritized arguably like even more with like data availability sampling light nodes, like they actually have that live. And the apps part is like, there's definitely more of like a product and application focus in most of these other ecosystems, Ethereum. And so the world computer thing is, again, it's like, it's a little bit hand wavy. It's not perfect, but I do think it gets to the things that are actually unique advantages for Ethereum. Computer, like, yeah, I would say that's pretty, any general purpose blockchain can mostly get to that. But the world part, I think, is like actually the differentiator there. You can very credibly say, hey, what is the most decentralized, credibly neutral, computer in the sky type of vision today? I would still say it's Ethereum, like broadly. Yeah. It's not the most performant computer. It's not the fastest computer, but it is the one that you think of as like, this is the most, like, it is the world's computer. And there is value to that. And so that, Ethereum can kind of serve this whole range of purposes. You want to go make your super, private permission blockchain, go do that, make a layer 2 on top of Ethereum. But if you also want the most maximally permissionless and like open zone where, you can go to deploy anything you want, that's not Base. That's not Arbitrum. That's not Optimism. That's the Coinbase computer. That's the Optimism computer. Like they are very clearly permissioned and gated in these different ways, where Ethereum layer 1 is not. And so that was the point that I was like trying to get at with that was I think that this is like a valuable direction where Ethereum actually can differentiate itself from a lot of other people, and was trying to highlight, hey, this is the area that's differentiated. What requires, what is required of you to fulfill that today is probably to actually refocus on L1 execution. And that's why, that was trying to kind of get towards like, why do I think that is important? Is because, when you think of these different chains, what is the thing that they are uniquely good at? And that is the thing that they're like hyper-focused on. Solana is like uniquely good at. We want to build the best decentralized trading platform and, build MCP and all those things. Like Celestia is hyper-optimized. We want to build the most unstoppable, verifiable, super easy to make applications. Makes sense. Ethereum's edge, where it still has one, is Ethereum L1. Like it is that. It's not just the roll-ups. It's, it has the most valuable state. It is the most decentralized, trustworthy place. The chain's not going to go down. You trust the architecture, all those things. It still has a lead on all those. And so I think it makes sense to lean into that and kind of take advantage of that and not just like give up that lead and tell everyone to like leave and go to L2s.
That's
both
fair.
have a place, but yeah.
Yeah. And it's helpful to hear the way that each of these chains have different strengths and different advantages. And the advantage that you're highlighting for Ethereum is its decentralization, its network effects. That's not something that other competitors have easily been able to mimic, and it's something that uniquely Ethereum possesses. The idea that L2s, that Ethereum has this decentralization, has layered scaling, or is able to uniquely scale in a decentralized way because these L2s can inherit the decentralization, basically be able to piggyback off of all of these amazing aspects of Ethereum. Do you buy into that as being an effective way to scale a public blockchain? There's a lot of questions related to, for Solana. Solana has made these trade-offs, particularly in terms of the amount of resources you need to run and operate a node on Solana, that people have argued makes the Solana network less decentralized than Ethereum because it has those high node requirements, and that even Solana itself faces these bottlenecks, these ceilings in terms of the throughput that it can manage without obviously relying on other services like Jito, but also perhaps it too one day having to pursue scaling through layers. What is your thoughts on the idea and the arguments that the reason why Ethereum can scale uniquely in a can uniquely be decentralized and scalable is because it has that decentralized aspect that no other network really has?
So I think it's a mix of things. Well, I would argue Bitcoin has a lot of that.
That's true, but it's not programmable.
Yes.
So let's
not yet. But yes.
Set that aside.
But yes. I mean, I think there's like some truth to it. I think that most people take it to an extreme that I would say. I mean, like the very simple statement is, no, I do not believe that Solana will ever scale to host like the entirety of the world on it. Like that's just not going to happen. One is just, practical, technical reasons, like it'll never be quite there, to meet the full demand of anything, maybe theoretically in the endgame, but even along the way, it's just not going to be there. And then there's all the different like political, economic, customization, whatever reasons why. You're going to have other chains. That's totally fine. That also doesn't mean that it isn't the best strategy to just like build the one thing and try to build it as fast as you can. That may still very well be the rational strategy. And I think it very encapsulates a lot of Ethereum kind of ideology and personality. I remember like Donkra was actually tweeted this, I think like yesterday. It's like he was going back and forth with someone like arguing over execution, basically exactly this. And the other person was saying like, oh, but you would only like we can only like 100x the execution performance on the L1. That's not the endgame. That's not enough. And like Donkra was applying like this is like a very classic like Ethereum response. Like you're not happy with the 100x because it's not this like perfect total endgame solution versus like the Solana side would be like, oh yeah, 100x in performance, like great, let's do it. And it's like just keep going from there. And so I think that Ethereum has had a lot of that ideology where like, yes, I agree that like one L1 is not this like perfect endgame solution that's going to do everything in 20 years from now, blah, blah, blah. That also doesn't mean it's not the right decision to aggressively prioritize that thing today. It may very well still be the right decision to prioritize that early on and then grow into the other points later on that are going to be the perfect endgame type solution. I think the reality is that Ethereum itself is like never going to be the full thing anyway, even with all the rollups and all these things. Like that's very clearly just not going to happen. I don't think any of these chains will be. The question is, I think the important question is, and this is what I think like a lot of Ethereum has been lacking over time, is what should we prioritize and when? What does the market like actually need now, and what can be credibly and very quickly improved now to like a meaningful degree? And so I think that's a lot of why like execution scaling fell by the wayside over the last 5 years or whatever, because it wasn't seen as this like, oh, we can't 1000x this thing right now. This isn't the endgame solution. But you ignored the 2x, the 3x, the 4x, the 5x, the whatever that like piles up a lot, where you could have built like a very useful product kind of in the meantime. And so I think that there's like more of a realization now. Like there is more refocusing. I mean, very concretely, the gas limit finally went up, a few days ago, and I think that's going to happen again. People were saying right after that, I think it was Victor from Coinbase tweeting today, like, all right, right after Petra, like we want to do 60 million. And so there's finally more of that attitude and realization of like, yeah, no, it's not the perfect endgame, but the reality is that like this is what most of people need today is just like one reasonable chain that's like pretty scalable, and people do still want to use Ethereum. So if people want to use it, like we shouldn't be forcing them away. Yeah.
I agree with you that there are definitely improvements and tweaks that can be made to the L1. The increase from 30 to 36 million gas recently was a nice kind of improvement. However, the bottlenecks in terms of L1 scaling is something that I think Ethereum developers have seen so frequently in Ethereum's history. The CryptoKitties, the DeFi, the ICO, the NFTs, you name it. And if the scaling roadmap of Ethereum with its L2s doesn't host the millions of new users, the RWAs, the ZK, the DPIN, the DSOC, if it's not able to really fuel a revolution in finance and these different areas, it's hard for me to see any rationale for why there would be a use case for blockchain outside of digital gold and just speculation. Because what you can make with a Solana is a Solana type blockchain that's high performance, fast, can be spun up, broken down, spun up and broken down. The value proposition of basically then all general purpose blockchains, it falls so far down from what the potential was, like why people initially invested into Ethereum and kept Ethereum's value going for so long. I think it's the logical end to, if Ethereum's not the blockchain that's able to support the Web3 vision, there is no Web3 vision. Doesn't that make you kind of fearful as an investor of what this could mean for the value of the crypto industry?
No. I think that we're going to be able to scale to meet all of the needs that we need as an industry.
But like you said, Solana and the L1 scaling vision, it really will not. They're not going to be able to house these decentralized applications. Whereas the potential for, say, like RWAs for these applications.
Oh, I think they're definitely going to host all of those.
On Solana?
Yeah.
I think it scale?
Yes. Yeah, I think that you will be able to host like pretty much just about any individual application. I just realized that not all of them will be on the same chain. That just from a technical, practical, economic, social, whatever perspective, like they're just not all going to be on one chain. But I think that Solana will be capable of handling. I mean, like effectively any use case you want. RWAs, trading, whatever you want. Solana can certainly do all of them. I have no fears of that. It's just that I just don't think it's going to end up on one chain.
What about
Like, I don't think the incremental decentralization of Ethereum, this will be I don't know, the spicy statement that people get normally feel like, I don't think it adds much of anything today. The validator decentralization on Ethereum versus Solana, I think concretely adds like not a lot today. I don't think there are any like very concrete properties that you could point to of like, oh, in this like World War III scenario, that the fact that Ethereum has, 5,000 validators or whatever, probably less, like compared to Solana's like 1,500 validators or whatever. Like if the U.S. government wanted to screw them over, like they can do the same thing to both. If they really want to censor most of the blocks, they can do that on both chains. Like we've seen that on Ethereum. I'm sure they could do it on Solana very easily. I don't think that the like extra marginal validator decentralization at the moment is like getting you anything concretely. I think that there are like general high-level reasons why validator centralization is good and like in the long run, can provide all these different properties. But concretely, like we've sort of just like picked an arbitrary point in time of like these are the validator requirements, which are sort of like undefined at the moment, which I think it's good that people are trying to finally define them. But like most of the incremental like pushing it past that, I think it like mostly has unclear value to me. I think it's like mostly constrained Ethereum as opposed to like actually adding a lot of tangible value today. Like exactly the point where Ethereum has on the trade-off today.
I don't see the difference in centralization between Solana and Ethereum being marginal. I see actually the difference in centralization being very large. But in terms of the benefit, in terms of like...
But where? In what areas do you think the decentralization that matters the most is different? Because I agree that there is a difference, but I just don't think it's the validator count.
In terms of governance...
I agree with this, yeah.
Very, like, the difference is quite large, but agree. The other topic is the benefit of that. But yeah, governance, nodes, in terms of how many people are operating the chain, keeping the chain alive. Number 3, number of stakeholders, diversity in stakeholders. 3, the user base. The type of people using Solana very much in the meme coin games. Not to say that's a bad game, like the diversity. So like in almost every single aspect when I can think of, the number of people developing the ecosystem, the amount of investment, stakeholders, it's the difference in terms of decentralization and centralization. That gap is very large. But I hear you in the sense of like, in terms of benefits, that gap being so large, like is the benefit really, is it a marginal benefit? And in my view, for applications like, let's just say NFTs, provenance and the authenticity of the chain, like being able to verify the data on the chain, the uptime of the chain, these things really matter for assets of high value, of sticky users, of having applications that aren't here today and gone tomorrow. This is really when the decentralization matters. And for Ethereum, if those applications have the best shot, I guess, of succeeding and having a place to scale on a blockchain like Ethereum versus kind of like a up-and-coming blockchain like Solana that's really Solana, I don't know why I said it like that, that's going through basically the same growing pains that Ethereum was 5 years ago, dealing with MEV, dealing with ways to scale, dealing with, how to increase its, to decentralize further. So if it is that decentralization, but if it is that decentralization still doesn't matter, and the properties of decentralization are not valued above the speed and the performance and the UX of Solana, then I cannot imagine that the value of really Solana or any other up-and-coming competitor would ever reach, again, the level of value that Ethereum once had when the markets decided that the decentralization properties of blockchains could revolutionize, like industries. I guess the potential then of public blockchains drops to just, maybe being able to house one app on one chain or maybe 2 very popular apps on another chain, and then having to have this like kind of fragmented world where you have a bunch of decentralization for just really one chain, Bitcoin. Because if you have all these other fragmented chains with their own security zones, then every single blockchain will be very limited, I guess, in their ability to scale. No?
So I think decentralization, like, very concretely has value. I think that a lot of what we're doing here and what I see happen in Ethereum a lot is conflating different types of decentralization and the scale of them. Like, I think it's valuable in a number of ways that, like, Ethereum has a very decentralized stakeholder set, a lot of people participating in governance, like all of those things. That is very different than, hey, if we, 3x the validator requirements tomorrow, do we lose any properties that we really care about in Ethereum? And I would say the answer is, like, generally no to that question. I think if you just, like, started increasing the gas limit within reasonable bounds over the next few years, started increasing the hardware requirements from, Raspberry Pi that you can kind of run in the middle of nowhere to, like, pretty good laptop in, like, a pretty good place with a pretty good internet connection, I don't think that you lose a lot of practical properties. Like, we need to concretely pick somewhere on the trade-off spectrum. Concretely today, I mean, that's the problem, is I think that a lot of the hardware requirements and stuff like that, the node requirements in Ethereum are just, like, they're just undefined. And, like, there is finally an effort with an ACD to, like, start defining those. And, like, it's difficult to get people to agree on that, but I think that is really important.
I don't like those efforts, but yes.
Oh, you don't like
No,
them?
but
Oh,
continue.
okay. No, I think they're quite important, and I think that we need to, like, set the groundwork and then be able to, like, have the conversation about, okay, this is the point where we are today. If we double them and we move this number a little further, like, what do we lose versus what do we gain? And then you can concretely evaluate, like, okay, hey, if we double the bandwidth requirement that we're putting on nodes and we lose, X percent of coverage in the world, do we think that meaningfully inhibits any of the properties that we care about in Ethereum? Do we think that we're, half the validator set's going to drop off? Do we think that the chain's going to be censored? Like, do we think we're actually going to lose concrete properties that we care about? And my intuition is, like, most of the way along that trade-off curve is we can push that trade-off curve further a bit to be like, hey, if we do go a little bit further from these points where we are now, no, like, we're not going to lose a whole lot. But you will increase performance to, like, a meaningful degree that, it gets to that ideology of, like, is it perfect to do a 2x, a 3x, a 4x, a 5x, all those things? Like, no, you're not going to be more performant than Solana. But it's really helpful. Like, concretely, it is really helpful for all the existing applications, the existing users of Ethereum who want to keep using Ethereum. And then you grow into it over time. We can get to that, million X at the end game, same as anyone once, we ZK the L1, we got a data availability sampling, we do all those things. But changing the mindset from we wait until all those things are available to do the 1000X to, we're going to do those things when we get there. But, like, along the way, we realize that we can push the bar a lot further and we should keep doing those incremental things. That's what I think is, like, an important mind kind of shift to start undergoing. And I think we're starting to see that. I mean, like, concretely, like, the gas limit did go up. People are starting to think about, like, what should these limits be? I just think that when you start to, like, actually look at most of the numbers, you realize, like, we could probably push this further and, like, concretely not lose a lot of properties that the users, the applications, all these people care about on Ethereum right now. We kind of just, like, have an arbitrary point of requirements that we have set from, like, 5 years ago or whatever, and, like, haven't really reevaluated them because we've been focused on other stuff.
Why not push those trade-offs, those, like, moving the performance further, and not really to the detriment of decentralization, those kinds of decisions, those kinds of upgrades to the L2s? There is a lot of pushback to improving the L1 execution because of Ethereum's quote-unquote roll-up-centric roadmap. And, of course, there's the haters out there that, say that L2s are parasitic to Ethereum's value. Ethereum really needs to, pivot hardcore back to improving its L1 and the apps there. But we've talked about this outside of this show of how important it is that Ethereum keeps its rollups happy, as it's for me, when I think about rollups, that is the long-term revenue of Ethereum, no question. So why not push those performance and the execution ideas out to the L2s, outsource that problem to the L2s, let them figure it out, and Ethereum just keep chugging along, doing what it does, making tweaks, improvements here and there for its decentralized, basically keeping it maximally decentralized, and just forget about the competition that's happening with Solana and allow its L2s to compete with Solana, and just say, I'm out of the game.
I think you do both. And I think there's no reason not to do both. I think you improve the L1 and you also scale blobs and you do all the stuff that you can to keep the rollups happy. I concretely do not believe that Ethereum would have been in the position that it is today if it didn't have an execution layer with all the smart contracts and all the users there to begin with. Right. Cosmos Hub went down this route, like the whole Cosmos vision of they were sort of right in many ways. If we're gonna have many chains, we're gonna have interop between them, and we need to figure out shared security and all those things. They were kind of right on a lot of things. but they also just kind of got the path dependence wrong of, what do we need in the beginning? We kind of just need one big chain that everyone's going to use, and then we kind of branch out from there. And I think Ethereum started that way and just sort of got overly focused on just the long-term vision and kind of just completely forgot about the L1 and said, all right, everyone leave. Like, everyone go to the L2. When we just weren't ready for that yet. Like, quite frankly, most of crypto still just needed like one chain that was like going to scale a little bit more. Most of the L2s are like kind of janky. I don't trust putting a lot of money in them, all those things. But at the same time, the Ethereum was like trying to like just like force everyone off. And I think that you needed to just start like managing that process and that transition a lot better. And that's what I think that we're starting to see. The L2s keep getting better, and that's great, and they're going to keep getting better. But we're just not there yet where I'm going to put most of my money on an L2. I'm just not going to do that with most of my ETH, and like most people aren't going to do that. And so you're putting users in a very weird rock and a hard place if you're telling them we're not going to improve the L1, but L2s also aren't ready, and you do that for several years. What are they going to do? They're going to go somewhere else. And that's what we're starting to see happen. And so it's sometimes like not a satisfying answer to be like, oh, well, we can start improving it now. Like, we can get it better. Yeah, it's not satisfying because you're going to be much slower than Solana, all those things. But I think that you need to realize, where do you have a lead over other people? Where do you have a like concrete thing that people want to use? And for Ethereum, that is still the L1. And so I don't think it makes sense to just like throw that lead away and just kind of forget about it. I think that you need to lean into that lead, leverage that, and to turn that into a lead on the L2s. Keep the strength of the L1. That gives you a strong position, and then over time you keep improving the L2s. They're going to get closer to the L1. They're going to do all these things to make them more secure and closer to the L1. All those things. It's great, but they're just not there today. And so I think that you need to like manage that kind of transition a lot better. And a lot of that ends up looking like you improve the L1. I think part of what's also made it easier is I think that there's probably more appreciation now than there was, call it a couple of years ago, that most of the L1 improvements are actually like very, very helpful, very directly for the L2s, even if you don't care about L1 execution. I mean, like a very simple one right now is very literally like most of the L2 fees to the L1 over the past year, we're actually not paying for blobs. We're paying execution fees just like for posting them. And so if you just make execution cheaper, well, those fees should get cheaper. So I mean, like that very literally is helpful to them. I think that people also have a deeper appreciation now that fast slots and fast finality are very helpful to L2s. Like, they don't like reorgs. They don't like waiting a long time. Generally, also, if you actually want to make any of this base stuff like ever kind of make sense, I think that you need both of those. You need fast slots. You need SSF to like make that kind of useful. Like, this is what's blocking L2 interop is a very slow L1. And so people are starting to realize like, oh, most of these things that we talk about of like making the L1 better, of like making it faster, making it cheaper, having more gas, like actually that's very directly helpful to the L2s. And so that makes the conversation a lot easier when you realize, oh, even if we don't care about the applications on the L1, most of the changes are like kind of the same thing that like are very directly beneficial. And so I think that's like helping ease the conversation. But I'm hopeful that it starts to like start getting better now. I mean, very concretely, it is starting to get better for the first time in several years. But yeah, I think that Ethereum very concretely like needs to prioritize both at the same time. You should improve the L1. Clearly, people want to use this. You should try to keep those users happy and provide a great product. You can do that, while at the same time you continue to scale blobs. You keep the L2s happy. You try to keep them around. All that.
100%. I agree with you. And honestly, I think this sounds like the North Star, or basically what Ethereum needs to succeed and to compete. Hindsight is 2020 in that when developers pivoted to the rollup-centric roadmap, they pivoted a bit too hard. The L2s weren't ready, and now there's this way poorer user experience. But at the same time, it's not like Ethereum broke. Ethereum didn't take away any of the functionality that it had in order to support these L2s. Now, however, developers are enhancing the blob capacity through upgrades like Pectra and PeerDAS. In Pectra, they're going to have EIP 7702, BLS signature. These are all great things for L2s and the L1. I think you're right. There's a bunch of synergies that can be had in both of these. Ethereum is farthest along, I think, in the efforts to scale, but in a decentralized way. As we talk about this and the optimism and the future, the bright future and potential that Ethereum has, as long as in addition to the Web3 vision for how general purpose blockchains can transform all these industries, where does that put other blockchains like Solana? Do you foresee kind of the end game where Solana becomes an L2 on Ethereum? But in this vision where users stay on Ethereum because of the network effects and and then they move to L2s because the L2s become ready, mature, they inherit all the security and the decentralization. They have all the customizability that they want, all of the zones that they could ask for, the interoperability that they can hope for. Where does Solana and Celestia fit into this future? Because I don't see their role other than being absorbed into the Ethereum ecosystem.
Sure. So very concretely for both. While Ethereum still has a place as like an execution environment and value today, it is very concretely never going to compete with Solana on what Solana is trying to do. I don't think it will probably ever get there. I mean, for nothing else, I mean, currently the stated intention is that even for the very long-term Ethereum, like maybe we get to 4-second slots. And beyond that, people start to get very uncomfortable of going any lower for decentralization reasons.
But have you heard of the Unichain, John? Have you heard of the L2?
Exactly. And so the L2s are great, and there will be a lot of adoption and uses for them. That's great. But there is a very different place in my mind for a completely decentralized consensus that has thousands of participants versus, a super hyper-performant single sequencer type setup. And in general, I think if you were going down this route of we're going to have thousands of validators, globally distributed network, we're going to try to do the whole multiple concurrent proposers thing. Like we believe that this is going to be the cheapest and best price discovery engine, for trading. If you believe that and you can build that, there's no reason to stick that thing on top of Ethereum at that point. Like you have done all of the hard work at that point to build the entire system. There's no reason for that system to start like posting its data to Ethereum at that point. Or like, I mean, concretely what you can do is, I mean, you just have a bridge to it that like ends up being, you have ZK proofs or whatever. Like it's great. I think that'll end up happening between like most chains. But it's not going to be this like fundamentally tied back to Ethereum. We need to post all our data there if Solana works. Also, very concretely, I mean, Solana would not fit inside of Ethereum and will not probably ever, is my guess. And like maybe it does in the very long run, but I mean, you can very concretely, you can look at the numbers of like how much data it would take to fit Solana, and like you're orders of magnitude away from Ethereum being able to fit that. So concretely, I think that Solana like very clearly has a place still. There will be other standalone chains that are not Ethereum L2s. Same thing for Celestia. I mean, you can just do the math of like how much scaling do Ethereum blobs give you, and even with the current roadmap of expectations of all right, we're gonna double count in Pectra in a few months, and then like we're gonna get Pure DAS at some point in the next call it year or so. The expectations somewhere between I'd call it like 12 and 48 blobs. Like maybe we get that over the next like year, 2 years, whatever. You can concretely go look at the numbers of where this is going. And I mean, this is the tweet that I kind of sent out the other day of the current like 5-year plus expectation of where does Ethereum get with like 128 blobs, which is where we probably expect to get with like 2D sampling. That's what Celestia has today. That's not a lot. And concretely, obviously, like Celestia wants to increase by like orders of magnitude further. That number that Ethereum is trying to get to of like 1.33 megabytes per second, I think is what it's roughly like. That's what Celestia is now. That's like a 5-year out number for Ethereum. And that's still like not a lot. Like that doesn't fit, the Solanas of the world and them, the Hyperliquids of the world. And that's just like one chain, like one super high performance chain. And so very concretely, I think that the future is most of these high performance chains, like they're just not going to be using Ethereum DA. We're starting to see that transition already happening these L1s that are super performant, like don't fit. You cannot fit Solana or Hyperliquid even close to in Ethereum DA. And so what are you seeing? These new chains that are coming up. What is Eclipse doing? They're using Celestia. What is MegaETH doing? They're using EigenDA. What is Abstract doing? They're moving to Celestia. Like all of these chains that are just very simple product focused of, hey, we need maximum performance to compete. We need cheap fees and high throughput. Like we can't do that on Ethereum. And so there will necessarily be other providers for those. Celestia will do that for the rollups. EigenDA could do that for other like rollups in tandem kind of with Ethereum consensus. And you'll just have standalone L1s like Hyperliquid as well. But yeah, there's definitely a future for these alternative platforms because if you just like look at the performance statistics, like you will need these other platforms if we're actually going to scale beyond any kind of small degree, I would say.
The technical innovation of these other chains, the technical innovation of having the high processing of data on Solana, the technical innovation on the Celestia of this data verifiability, and Ethereum not being able to take on all of these innovations, or at least integrate them into their ecosystem today. And the value of those technical innovations, definitely, I see the value in them. I see this is the reason why I think the markets are clearly pricing these other assets at such high values, and Ethereum continues to underperform. In the event that when we're talking about Ethereum improving its L1, improving its L2, is there a way in which these technical innovations are adopted in the Ethereum ecosystem with the benefit of the decentralization and the network effects that Ethereum currently has? As in a world in which these technical innovations will continue to happen, there will be a new Solana, there will be a new Celestia, there will be new innovations in ZK, in all of these things. What technically cannot be, what we cannot really replicate or mimic as easily is the decentralization and the network effects of something like Ethereum. Is this not true? As in this future, like, isn't Ethereum just going to continue to adopt the technical innovations of the best and continue to grow and work off of its network effects, while these other technical innovations continue to kind of rise and fall? So when I think about Avalanche, Polkadot, all of these early innovations of how to make general purpose blockchains a lot more efficient, they've always been around, but none of them have really, they've existed and they continue to exist. But now, for the first time, I am wondering if that is the way the market state will continue to go, or if the value of the technical innovations just kind of outshines. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So concretely in two parts. One is, can anyone mimic the decentralization and network effects of Ethereum? Concretely, I think the answer is yes. I think you can. I think it just takes time. And I think that you're progressively starting to see that with other people like Solana. They are clearly very far off in terms of, number of people contributing to the ecosystem, how's the governance process work. They're slowly getting there. I mean, we have a couple clients, you're adding a couple more over time. There's more people who are getting interested in the ecosystem. There's more applications who are building there. And the process is going to slow down, and they're going to have all this kind of baggage that comes along with that. But yeah, you certainly can't decentralize it. It just takes a long time for these other ecosystems to do it. It will be difficult. It'll take time. On the kind of on the network effect side, I think that can probably even more easily be copied over, because I would say that Solana has probably has certainly gained on Ethereum much more in the past year and a half on the network effects compared to the decentralization side. I would say the governance process and stakeholders have decentralized, but they haven't 100x in the way that the network effects have. And I think you can overtake Ethereum in network effects in a short to medium term time horizon. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. So I think that you definitely can do that. And then the question is on the technical side, can Ethereum just reintegrate those things? It certainly will take learnings from other ecosystems and reintegrate them, and it is concretely doing that. I mean, stuff like Celestia has live today, it is working on. Ethereum will integrate a lot of that technology eventually. The question is what does eventually mean? If that is, it takes 10 times longer and it still ends up 10 times smaller, that's just a problem in the real world. Yes, they will eventually get data availability sampling and all these things, but if, Celestia is doing gigabyte blocks by that point, and this is 5 years, 10 years later, the application developers, they've left. They're going and building on other platforms. So it's not enough. And this is part of the problem that I think the Ethereum has had over time is it's a very endgame mindset of, at the limit, we can integrate everything into Ethereum. I think that's totally true. In theory, you can do that. But it's very difficult. It takes a very long time, and the path dependence does matter. If all the applications, all the developers leave in the next 5 years because you didn't scale anything, it doesn't matter if you reintegrate them in 10 years from now because the people left. It doesn't really matter. And so there needs to just be a little more recognition of where are we on this progress bar? And so what do we need to prioritize now as results? And so that's the main kind of point with like the execution layer stuff is I think that we need to realize, all of these endgame things where we're going to integrate all of this and have data availability sampling and horizontal scaling and millions of TPS across the world is great, but like it's really far away. You need to make sure that, you're actually providing a service to users along the way so that you stay in a strong position to capitalize on that.
Yeah.
Because concretely, that's the big advantage that like Ethereum has over Celestia today is Celestia has better tech. It does not have any of the users that Ethereum has. Like all the rollups, all the users, all the money, all that stuff is still on Ethereum. Solana is like starting to gain on that very meaningfully. And so if you just, completely ignore that for multiple years, you will eventually just like lose those network effects at some point. You can't just bank on the fact that, we'll integrate these things, 10, 20 years down the road.
Not that they are, okay? I mean, in fairness, it's not like developers are really like hands off, not doing anything.
No.
And I agree with you. I think truly the rise of Celestia and Solana has kicked Ethereum developers in the butt to focus on, you can do both at the same time and you need to. Question for you, and probably last question for you. Could turn into a few, but let me just put this out there. You have another piece called We're All Building the Same Thing. And Ethereum is clearly on its strategy is to do both at the same time and to do both well and eventually scale through L2s. Solana is starting off on a different starting point.
What do you mean to do both well? Sorry,
L2, sure. Yes. It's to scale incrementally the L1, but to eventually have long-term scaling with L2s. So yes, you're doing the minor, 36 million blob gas, but you recognize that, there's really only so much we're going to be able to support on the L1. Long-term to house like the RWAs, like the entire like global financial system, it's going to need the L2s. So trying to do both at the same time, like not push users too prematurely to these crappy user experiences, to give a bit of carrot to the users and then eventually kick them off to a wonderful L2 ecosystem. So doing both at the same time. Celestia starting off with a different standpoint of we've learned from Ethereum. We know that DA is modularity is what we need, and starting off like really strong on the DA front. Solana taking a different approach, starting off on, the decentralized NASDAQ, starting off centralized, decentralizing over time. Bitcoin even starting off with this digital narrative, but now, looking into having a lot more programmability, perhaps using its decentralized base to be able to secure many different assets. Are all of these ecosystems just building for the exact same thing?
So I think that they are going to keep getting closer and closer. And that was kind of the vibe of a lot of what that post was. I think that if you play all of these out to the absolute extreme, yes, they look the same. Like
competing for the same users,
yes.
The same money, the same apps. At
different levels of the stack. I mean, Bitcoin is not going to compete with Coinbase for who has the best monetary asset, but they end up fused in kind of the same system at the end of the day. But yeah, if you play all of them out, they do end up looking like effectively the same tech stack if you make the same assumptions. Like everyone can adopt everything. We say that eventually, okay, if one execution environment isn't enough, then we need to have these other ones, and then maybe Solana in 5 years starts saying, we prioritize this extra data lane where we're not worried about X. Like in theory, yes, that makes sense. The important point then ends up being if you say that, like, okay, if we think that the absolute endgame is kind of trending towards the same thing, which I think is like directionally the correct takeaway, that means what is the important thing to do is the most important point to differentiate yourself is sequencing of like what do you prioritize and when. If the end game is the same, you need to make sure that you are winning users today, so that like you get to that end game in the strong position. Because someone else will always ship better tech. That's just going to keep happening. Someone's going to launch a better execution environment than Solana. Someone's going to launch a better data availability than Celestia. You win by picking the right timing and trade-offs of when do we ship the right technology at the right time to win the right users that are sticky enough that they kind of stay around us, and that the next thing that comes after us is it's a 1.5x improvement. It's not a 10x improvement. Solana fundamentally got a lot of adoption in the last 2 years because it was 100x improvement over Ethereum and whatever the best alternatives were. If Ethereum was, 20x more scalable, would Solana have picked up a year and a half ago? Even if, Ethereum was not quite as fast as Solana, not like quite as scalable, probably not. Like Ethereum probably would have still gotten most of that stuff. And so that gets to that question of what do you prioritize and when? Because I think that Ethereum obviously would have liked if, in hindsight, we could have had a position where all the stuff that happened over the past 2 years happened on Ethereum. Like strategically, you would have liked that in hindsight. And so that ends up becoming the question is you need to think about what are my core competencies? What do users need right now? And concretely, 2 years ago, I think the answer was pretty much all crypto users needed one fast, cheap chain. Like that's pretty much enough for all the stuff that people are doing on chain today. And so Solana had the most pragmatic approach at that point in time of we just need to have the best like single fast, cheap chain with good UX because none of the interop stuff is ready. We don't need that many chains. None of this stuff is ready yet. And so that's why they've done well. And so that's where kind of Ethereum I think needs to like start to evaluate is we understand where all the endgame stuff is going. Like a lot of it's going to end up looking the same, but what do we think is going to happen in the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and what are we really good at that we should like lean into and try to compound our advantage on?
Yeah.
Because if you just focus on the end game and you don't focus on the short to medium term, someone else is going to overtake you, and then it doesn't matter that you got the best tech in 10 years. And so that's kind of a lot of the takeaway is you need to figure out like what is the correct sequencing. Yeah.
I think Ethereum became very hyper-focused on the end game and lost its vision for the short-term needs. But it's the pivot lately that I'm seeing in the community, especially with the launch of the likes of companies like Etherealize, Ethereum in giving up its user base of the fast and the cheap transactions of the use case of speculation, which honestly Vitalik never liked, always bemoaned, even when it made ETH price skyrocket and moon, of trying to attract the institutions, of trying to attract businesses, of trying to attract stickier users. I do think that strategy, because of Ethereum's reputation, gives them an edge in those conversations. In conversations with the likes of financial institutions like Franklin Templeton, BlackRock, Ethereum's reputation and resilience over time is an edge that they need to lean into now because those are people and users that other competitors are not able to get into the room with. Bitcoin, uniquely because of its hardcore, diehard Bitcoiners group, and also because of this very great narrative, the catchy narrative of digital gold, is able to get into conversations and achieve levels of adoption that I think Ethereum is not able to because it doesn't have the same. It's not able to get into the same rooms, those same conversations. But at the same time, Ethereum can get into the rooms with the likes of the major gaming companies, with the likes of existing, I don't know, like social media companies, in a way that other ecosystems I still think cannot. However, that gap is narrowing very quickly. So it's a conundrum.
Yeah. And that's part of why I was talking about it, especially in the last couple of days, of I think that Ethereans would do well to focus less on the moneyness because there's, again, a lot of this is a very endgame mindset of a lot of people have, like Justin was tweeting this the other day, of like Bitcoin security budget is going to break in 20 years and then basically Ethereum's going to be the best man standing. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's true. Like maybe Bitcoin doesn't figure out security budget like all these other solutions people have. Maybe they don't work and it breaks and then someone else needs to take that spot. The problem is you can't like bank your strategy on that thing happening in 20 years from now, because you're just not going to make it there on that. Because to your point, like they can't get into those rooms and those conversations right now. You can't tell someone that I'm the digital gold, but hey, they have a problem in like 20 years from now and I'm going to be better. You need to focus on what am I good at today? What are the rooms that I can get into today? What can I win? And so there's a lot more refocusing on that of like, I actually think that a lot of the moneyness stuff like probably makes sense for Ethereum, but like in the long run, that shouldn't be the target today because it's clearly just not what you can win at today. So 100%. Figure out what are you good at, what are the rooms you can get into and win today, and then like really lean into those things.
Yeah.
And there's starting to be more realization of that, which I think is very good.
Yeah. You can't be a better money than Bitcoin right now, Ethereum. Yeah. I'm just listen to us. This whole narrative of like ultrasound money, it was awful. It was awful. Please stop. For the sake of our bags, please stop. Okay, one very, very final question. Aside from the Ethereum and the competition and the Solana and the whatever, is there a Web3 use case application? A really exciting kind of app that you think could really be transform the world through public blockchains, through general purpose blockchains, and if so, what is it?
So the stuff that I've always been excited by in crypto and still am now are the very, very, very simple things. And it's always funny, like in cycles like this, where people get like disillusioned of we don't have these exciting new narratives. These cycles like the AI thing is like not very, it's kind of disappointing. It feels fake. Blah blah blah. All these things. I'm like, yeah, it's totally true. I don't lose sleep over that because if we hit the like 2 or 3 big things, it doesn't matter. If we hit non-sovereign store of value money for people to have that you can have self-custodially, you can have by yourself, and we add privacy, and we have stable coins on chain, and we have basic finance around that, it's great. That's it. I don't care if anything else works in crypto. Like, you had an amazing outcome on the world. I'm going to use this thing every day. It's going to be a very like positive impact on everyone. It's great. And so really, it's just that for me. So those are really the 2 main things I like really, really want to see, I would say, over the next year, 2 years, like start to get a lot better. One is privacy tech. I want privacy to like actually be normal and used and just like really integrated into very good applications where this is just like a normal thing that you use. So I mean, like shout out like one of the companies that we're invested in is like Pay, which is like very simple. I mean, just like it'll grow into more, I would say, financial services, lending, all these different things, like basically being your own bank. But like what is it right now? It's just like it's payments. Like you have an app on your phone that looks like Venmo, and they have like their private owned roll up. It's hard to get adoption for those things. It's hard to sell people on privacy. It's like hard to like really get this integrated in payment rails. There's still like open regulatory questions of like what is the right level of privacy that we need. All this stuff is going to need to change. But that is something that like I'm very excited to see over the next few years. Is we really need to lean into privacy, because if we keep going down the road of just like totally transparent public blockchains and we just like sort of entrench that as normal, there is a very bad outcome for crypto, and that is like by far the thing that scares me the most. Like if we end up in the world where crypto just kind of didn't work, I'd be very disappointed, but like whatever. We go back to the way that things were, and we were probably a force on TradFi for like, kicking them in the butt to like make them a little more transparent, cheaper, faster, whatever. If we end up in the world where just like we just built surveillance tech for all the governments in the world, I would be like pretty unhappy about that. That would kind of suck. So I really don't want that to happen, and I think that the window gets like harder and harder the longer that we go without making privacy normal. And right now, privacy is like not normal in crypto. So we need to get a lot better about that. And then the other half, so I mean, practically what that means today is stable coins. And that's what I think that most of it will be for a while. And then the other half of it that I'm excited about is that like non-sovereign store value. Like I really do believe in that as the killer use case, is just money. And so concretely what that looks like now, I think, is, all the stuff around Bitcoin. It's do we do OpCat? How do we build like actual trustless rollups on Bitcoin? Because they are not possible today. You can like build pretty good stuff, which like that, like I've written about recently, like we've invested in stuff like Alpin that we're super excited about, but the tech is not there to build, fully trustless private stuff on top of Bitcoin. And I really, really want that to get there, because if we get to a point where 5 years from now, we say that like Bitcoin is very easy for people to use. You can use it privately. You can do private payments with stable coins, all that stuff. I'm super happy with what crypto did, and I don't really care about a whole lot else beyond that. So those are the things I'm like definitely excited for.
That's so good. I love those things. And I mean, on the Bitcoin front, not sure how well they'll be able to upgrade.
We'll see,
things up, but you're right. But we'll see. I guess we'll see. Thank you so much, Jon. Really, really appreciate the thoughts, and thank you so much for coming onto the show. Thank you to all of our listeners who are listening to this episode of The Infinite Jungle. We hope that you learned something new about Ethereum, and I hope that you'll join again for another episode. We are signing off from the concrete jungle that is New York City in your explorations of the infinite jungle that is Ethereum. Stay safe out there.